When we do practices, we're doing something called emotion regulation. And that's essentially our capacity to regulate intense or extreme emotions. So many times, whether it's anxiety, anger, depression, a lot of self judgment, they relate to our capacity or sometimes our struggle with how do we regulate? What do I do with these feelings when I get overwhelmed? That's a question many people will ask me. What do I do when I get really triggered or activated, right? And so dialectical behavioral therapy is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy that really looks at skill building. So if you are familiar with DBT, this will be a little review, but Marsha Linehan created this curriculum in the early 1990s. She recognized that many of her clients didn't have tools to manage emotions, right? And really, many of us struggle with how do I manage the difficult emotions? I have a negative interaction at work or I feel overwhelmed. So for many of us, we have to learn the skills. We're not always taught them, certainly not in school. And maybe our family of origin, we didn't really learn or have good role models for how to manage complex or difficult emotions, right? So we need to learn them. We need to develop skills. So that's really what emotion regulation is. It's the development of skills to manage and help us regulate our emotions. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So I love DBT because they use acronyms. Acronyms are really fun. It helps us to remember information. So this DBT skill is one of my favorites. When someone on a regular basis is having difficulty managing anxiety and stress, can make a little plan. And it's really the practicing of a plan on a regular basis. So none of these are like brand new concepts, but if we put them together as a toolkit with the intention to regulate our emotions, we're more likely to do it and we're more likely to follow it and track how we're doing. So ABCs, so accumulate positives. I was just running a group for working moms right before this call, and we talked about developing a toolkit of positive activities. And each person went around and talked about what worked for them, which were completely different. One woman loved to go for drives. One woman loved playing loud music, right? So we have our different ways of accumulating positive activities, but we need to actually come up with a list, believe it or not. We often forget, oh yeah, I like doing puzzles or I like doing planting or gardening, right? Building mastery can be another important thing. One of the women in my group talked about how she plays piano and even 5 minutes of practicing piano helps her get out of a negative mindset, right? So we want to pick something that helps activate our frontal lobes. If our mind is focused on something else, especially something that is challenging and enjoyable, our anxious and worried thoughts sometimes dissipate, right? So we can kind of practice activating our brain in a positive way. And then the C is planning ahead when we know something is going to be distressing. I was working with a client who struggles with Mother's Day, right? And many of us do, especially if we've had struggles with our own parents or we have struggles with our kids or we're not able, many reasons why we might have difficulty. And so planning ahead, what would be a way, knowing that this could be an emotionally charged day, that I can bring soothing or resourcing into my nervous system. So we plan ahead using our C, right? So that's an ABC of emotion regulation. What would it be like to just do this on a regular basis? So there are many worksheets. So DBT has a whole workbook of different worksheets you can do to plan ahead and do some of this emotion regulation skill building. It's a practice, right? Unfortunately, for many of us, we'll do a little bit of it and then we forget, right? So that's why I like to go back to these acronyms. The second one is something called please, which is such a basic, right? And when we're really struggling, like depressed or really having a difficult time, we start with the physical, the somatic grounding, taking a shower, feeling good about our bodies, right? Treating our illnesses if we're not feeling well, eating regularly, avoiding what isn't working. So these are very basic, like nothing is new here, but it's putting them together, prioritizing them and intending to do them to help us regulate our emotions. That's the part that's really valuable. It's this idea of making a plan and sticking to the plan, that commitment to yourself. And then finally, exercising or stretching, moving your body, right? That's where we know our yoga and our somatic practices can play a big role. And I want to end with this notion of self-compassion. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the idea of bringing mindful presence to our experience. When we're suffering, most of us judge ourselves. I shouldn't feel anxious. I should stop feeling this way. What's wrong with me, right? We can have a whole host of negative cognitions. And when we bring compassion to ourselves, which really refers to mindful presence, loving kindness, and feeling connected, when we do that, that helps us to bring more gentleness, helps us be more resilient, and we're more likely to do some of the emotion regulation practices we were talking about. So self-compassion is linked to well-being, life satisfaction, happiness, confidence, body appreciation, immune functioning. When we're more gentle with ourselves, it's the opposite of how we often think. But when we're able to actually be kind to where we are, we're more likely to make changes, right? But we have to bring that toward ourselves. 80% of us are more compassionate to others than ourselves. Just not shocking, right? But if you think about how we talk to ourselves when we're in distress, that is often the last thing we would say to anybody, right? Snap out of it, or you suck, or something terrible, right? So can we, when we meet a moment of our own distress, bring kindness, like, oh, this is hard. This is painful. Oh, I know I'm not alone. Other people feel this too, right? So that gentle recognition that we're struggling, and then also bringing kindness to ourselves. So attuning to our inner dialogue, being genuine when we're struggling, recognizing we're not alone. Sometimes it's speaking the truth and setting the boundaries, right? And then finding this balance of self-care strategies to resource ourselves. So I love the compassion break. So we'll kind of end on this note today, which is this idea that when we feel emotional pain, stress, judgment toward ourselves or others, we can do this practice. And this can be done as a formal practice, or it can be done very briefly. I'm going to lead it in a brief way because I want you to have all these little short practices today to consider for managing stress. So first, it's the idea of noticing when we're stressed, right? Each of us have different signals or warning signs, right? For me, I notice I'm irritable. Like, that's my first sign. It doesn't come out as worried thoughts or other things. It comes out as a slight irritability and impatience. So I'll use myself, for example. I notice the impatience, and if I pause, right, I can recognize, oh, there's something here. And often when I notice, oh, I'm irritable, then I realize, oh, I'm actually feeling really, really worried. I'm really worried about this situation. So naming what is happening, being able to be mindful and recognizing, oh yeah, this is painful. This is a moment of suffering. I'm worrying, right? And then recognizing other people are worried too, like I'm not alone. And imagining, sometimes it's even helpful to imagining like other people feel just like I do, right? And then bringing care to our system. How can I care for myself right now? Right? And I often do this little resource, and maybe you can try it with me, just placing your hand on your heart and just recognizing that, this is a moment of struggle. I can feel the sensations in my body, and I can bring kindness. I might not be able to solve the situation right now, but I can bring a moment of compassion to my experience. So I'm going to invite you now to gently, if you've closed your eyes, open your eyes and come back. And I'm going to stop sharing here and just invite you, if anyone has any questions or comments about anything I've shared today, about emotion regulation, about bringing self-compassion, and also to really understand you're not alone, that anxiety and workplace stress are so common, and we need to continue to build tools for ourselves. We can't learn it alone, right? Like often people expect that we can just work ourselves out of this. We just have to stop worrying and move forward, stop the anxious thoughts. And I hope today you see that we actually need tools and we have to practice skills. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? Sometimes we need to go to a professional. As Mental Health Awareness Month, I do want to say too, that for some of us, talking to a therapist can make a big difference. Someone who can practice the skills together. Recognizing that, extra help is really, really valuable when our anxiety is getting in the way of our happiness, of our well-being. So, really thinking about what do I need to feel well on a daily basis? and how much anxiety or stress is interfering with my quality of life, right? So I hope that these techniques give you a sense of a possibility, what you might use in the future, but also something that you can try right away as well. You're welcome. Thanks, Heidi.